Hi, welcome to Midnight Sleep Whispers, where you can immerse yourself in a world of mysterious and spine-chilling horror stories. Perfect for drifting off to sleep or simply unwinding. Get cozy, dim the lights, and let's begin.
America, Texas, Dallas, August 2023. The heat presses down on the city, making the air shiver over the hot asphalt. On the outskirts, away from the busy streets, hides an abandoned mansion, forgotten by time and people. The window frames are peeling, the doors are askew, and the interior is perpetually dark, interrupted only by the rays of the setting sun through the cracks. In the center of the large room stands an old dollhouse, an exact replica of this building, detailed to the smallest detail. It seems to have a life of its own. Tiny lamps burn in its miniature rooms. Furniture is arranged with frightening precision, and small figures are frozen in elaborate scenes. Elisa, a 20-year-old girl with pale skin and large eyes, methodically arranges the miniature dolls, finding the perfect poses for them. She works in complete silence, focused, like an artist creating a masterpiece. Her world is order. There is nothing more important than correctly arranged figures, nothing more important than a perfect picture of life. She studies people, observes them, identifies those who do not fit into her ideas of harmony. To her, they are broken, they are wrong, but she has a way to make things right. She creates a new, better world for them. There is no chaos, no mistakes, no pain, only order, only perfection. One hot August evening, Eliza sits by the window, watching the street. Her attention is caught by a young couple in the park. They are laughing, looking happy. Their movements are spontaneous and their emotions are out of control. The guy suddenly grabs the girl in his arms and spins her around, causing another explosion of laughter. Their joy irritates Elise. They are too free, too chaotic. They spoil the picture of a perfect world where everything should go by the rules. They don't understand how they should behave properly. Elise watches them for a long time, memorizing the smallest details. What they are wearing, how they move, what expressions appear on their faces. Then she turns to the dollhouse. Two miniature figures, exact replicas of the couple, are already lying on her desk. Their faces are carved with frightening precision, every curve of their lips, every look perfectly rendered. Eliza takes them in her hands and carefully places them in one of the tiny rooms of the doll's mansion. They are now lying in a miniature bed, their postures relaxed, but their facial expressions distorted with horror. Eliza smiles. Now they are perfect. Now they will live by her rules. Eliza grew up in a world where chaos was an unacceptable luxury. Her mother, a cold and authoritarian woman, controlled her every move, demanding absolute obedience. The house was orderly to the point of absurdity. Books arranged by size, clothes hung by color, toys lined up in perfect rows. But you couldn't play with them. They were to remain untouched, like museum pieces, existing only for contemplation. If Eliza dared to upset this balance, she was punished severely. Once, when she was 6, she picked up a doll and tried to brush its hair. Her mother saw this and silently, without a word, took the toy away and threw it into the fireplace. Eliza watched the fire devour the doll, and in that moment she learned a lesson. Things should stay in order. Their purpose is to exist, not to change their shape. Her childhood was spent in cold and fear, but Eliza got used to it. She learned to live by her mother's rules, to be perfect, to conform to her demands. But there was something else brewing inside her, a need to make the rules herself. When her mother died, leaving her alone in a huge, extinct house, Eliza felt free for the first time. Now she didn't have to obey. Now she could create order on her own. As the years passed, her control over the world took on more and more frightening forms. She realized that the people around her were puppets like the ones on her shelves. Only, they don't know how to live right. They make mistakes. They mess up the perfect picture of the world. But she could fix it. The first time it happened was by accident. She met a girl who reminded her of herself as a child. Confused, uncoordinated, overly emotional. Eliza watched her for days, studying her behavior, noting in her head all her flaws. The girl seemed weak, unable to control herself. and Eliza realized she had to intervene. She brought her into the house, sat her down in front of her, talked to her, explained how to live, how important it was to follow the rules. But she wouldn't listen. She tried to run away, screaming, begging to be let go. Elise was disappointed. She wanted to help her, to give her a chance to be a better person, but she was incorrigible. So the only way left for her was to become part of the perfect world. When Eliza put the first figure in her dollhouse, she felt a sense of satisfaction. Now this girl could no longer make mistakes. Now she was part of order, part of perfection. As time went on, there were more and more of these figures. Eliza selected people carefully, watching them, analyzing their flaws, correcting their fates. She creates for them a new, perfect existence, in which there is no room for chaos. She doesn't see herself as a monster. On the contrary, she sees herself as a savior. After all, these people will now be perfect forever. In late August 2023, a young couple, Julia and Nate, disappear in Dallas, Texas. They had been dating for several years, had planned to move in together, and friends described them as carefree and happy people. On the evening of their last contact, they were walking in a city park, sitting on a bench, laughing, chatting about something of their own. Security cameras recorded them walking down the path along the river, and then nothing. They haven't come home. They're not answering their cell phones. Their phones are disconnected. 24 hours later, their loved ones contact the police. The investigation begins at the park. Police officers check the bench where they were last seen, but find nothing suspicious. Video footage from nearby cameras doesn't yield anything either. They just disappeared. Their car is still parked in the parking lot outside the cafe they went to before their walk. There's nothing unusual in it, just a package of donuts they didn't have time to finish. Cards and bank accounts are untouched. No sign of a struggle, no witnesses. It's like they vanished into thin air. Meanwhile, in an old mansion outside of town, hidden behind a thicket of trees, Eliza watches over their miniature replicas. Her dollhouse is an exact scene from real life. A small bench, two miniature humans frozen in a moment of conversation. But now they are no longer laughing. Their expressions are frozen, their bodies slightly stiffened. There is no chaos in this world, no impulsiveness. Everything is under control. Elise slowly runs her finger over the figures, correcting Julia's posture, tilting her head slightly in a sign of humility. She sits Nate a little straighter, giving his posture an emphasized discipline. Everything must be just as she'd intended. They had been so boisterous, so carefree, but now they were part of something bigger. Now they live in perfect order. She sits down next to the cabin, head tilted to the side, watching the miniature scene. Here no one argues, no one destroys the harmony. Here they will forever be in the world Eliza has created for them. She smiles. Everything is right now. Daniel Harris, a forensic psychologist, has been advising the Austin Police Department on missing persons cases for several years. His specialty is unconventional cases where the perpetrator's motive doesn't fit into the usual framework. When the case of Julia and Nate's untraceable disappearance comes across his desk, he notices one detail that seems too strange to be a coincidence. They are not the first people to go missing in the neighborhood. He analyzes missing persons reports from the past few years. All the victims disappeared within a few miles of each other. Young couples, single people, no social ties or occupations. The only thing that connects them is location. They were all spotted in the same area of town before disappearing forever. This leads him to think, perhaps the kidnapper does not hunt at random, but chooses victims according to some principle of his own. But what exactly unites these people in the eyes of the criminal? Daniel plunges into the investigation, checking real estate in the area, old archives, information about the owners of the houses. And soon his attention is attracted to one place, an old mansion, abandoned for several years, but formerly owned by one single mistress. Eliza Monroe, a 20-year-old girl who inherited the house after her mother's death. Almost nothing is known about her. No social media, no friends or relatives. Neighbors say they occasionally see her around town, quiet, inconspicuous, always alone, works remotely, hardly ever leaves the house. But Daniel knows that sometimes it's people like this who hide the darkest secrets. His intuition tells him she may be connected to the disappearances. He decides to take a closer look at her. Daniel spends his days and nights researching the disappearances and legends surrounding the old mansion. In the archives, he finds references to the previous owners, the Monroe family, whose lives were surrounded by rumors. It was said that Eliza's mother was obsessed with control, that no one in the house could make a move without her approval. But most eerie of all are reports of strange children's screams that locals heard coming from the mansion years ago. It becomes clear to Daniel, this house is the key to everything. He decides to break in. At night, armed with a flashlight and a voice recorder, he makes his way to the abandoned building. The lock on the door is surprisingly new, which confirms his suspicions. The house is not as empty as it appears. He cautiously steps inside, and the first thing that strikes him is the silence. But as the flashlight beam glides through the rooms, he notices strange details. There is an odor of varnish and dust in the air. On the walls hang portraits of people he's seen before, in photos from police reports. And then he notices it, a huge dollhouse in the center of the room. It exactly replicates the architecture of the mansion. Even the smallest details match. But the worst part is that inside this miniature house, there are figures, little dolls, frozen in various poses. Their faces, they are not just molded, they are as if petrified in horror. At that moment, the silence is broken. Somewhere in the back of the house, a floorboard creaks. Eliza knew he was coming. She felt threatened, but she had never been the victim, only the hunter. Meanwhile, the viewer sees the truth. Deep inside the house, in hidden rooms, her victims are still alive. She doesn't just kidnap them, she creates a proper life for them. She makes them act out scenes where they have to be perfect. The right way to talk, the right way to sit, the right way to eat. She controls them until their last breath. And when someone no longer meets her standards, they disappear. But not permanently. His place in the dollhouse is already prepared. Daniel treads carefully on the creaky floor of the old mansion. There is an odor of dust and mustiness in the air, remotely reminiscent of a child's room where the windows have been left open too long. The rays of his flashlight catch the faded wallpaper, the peeling paint on the doors, the silhouettes of old furniture covered in sheets. He knows that something terrible has happened here, but he doesn't yet understand the full extent of the nightmare. He reaches the far end of the hallway, where he assumes the main room must be. Frozen in front of the massive door, he listens. Silence. Daniel inhales, then gently pushes the door open. It opens with a long creak. It reveals a scene that sends an icy chill down his spine. In the center of the room stands a huge dollhouse, an exact miniature replica of the mansion. But it's not the house itself that matters. It's what's inside. In each tiny room are frozen miniature figures of people, their poses conveying frozen terror, despair, pleas for mercy. He recognizes them, the faces of those who have disappeared. He feels his breath hitching. This is not just a game. It's not just a collection. This is a captured tragedy, frozen lives that once belonged to real people. In that moment, he realizes, to Elise, they were never individuals. She didn't destroy them, didn't torture them for the sake of cruelty. She was just fixing them, fitting them to her perfect standards. He takes a step back, trying to realize what he's seen, but a sudden sound causes him to freeze. The door behind his back slams shut. The room grows darker. The air seems to thicken into something viscous, sticky. In the corner of the room, in the darkest part of it, a female figure is visible. Eliza steps out of the shadows slowly, unhurriedly, like a person who has nothing to fear. There is no panic or anger in her gaze, only calm satisfaction. She watches him, appraising him like a new item in her collection. Daniel realizes he's made a mistake. He came here as a hunter, but now realizes that he himself is trapped. Through the frosted glass of the window, the first rays of sunlight begin to pierce through. The room is in perfect order, every item meticulously in its place. An old gramophone crackles softly, playing a muted melody. Eliza sits at the table, leisurely stirring her tea with a spoon in a porcelain cup. She appears calm, at peace, like an artist who has just completed their masterpiece. On the table, next to the cup, stands a dollhouse. In the morning light, it looks even more lifelike. Tiny windows, miniature furniture, a carpet with a pattern visible only up close. Everything is flawless, every detail carefully considered. Eliza gently picks up a small figurine and places it inside. She smiles. Now everything is in its place. The figurine is a replica of Daniel, dressed in the same clothes, with the same expression frozen between fear and the realization of the inevitable. He has taken his spot among the others, those who once tried to resist but are now part of her perfect world. The mansion remains as silent as ever, hidden from prying eyes. Birds begin their morning song, and the wind rustles the dried trees. Silence. But then, a faint rustle. The miniature figurine of Daniel trembles, almost imperceptibly, yet it moves. Four friends, united by their passion for vlogging, decided to embark on another adventure to delight their subscribers with new content steeped in the spirit of mystery and abandoned places. Ethan, a tall guy with dark hair and a determined gaze, had always been the group's unofficial leader. His boldness and confidence made the others feel protected, even though he sometimes acted too impulsively, heedless of the consequences. Beside him sat Emily, a girl with short chestnut hair and a habit of nervously fidgeting with a bracelet on her wrist. She was the team's analytical mind, capable of digging up any information, though her emotional nature often took over, especially when it came to the chilling stories she loved to explore. In the back seat of the old pickup truck sprawled Jake, a lanky guy with glasses and perpetually messy bangs, the group's tech wizard responsible for cameras, drones, and editing. A skeptic to his core, he never believed in the supernatural, convinced that every mystery had a logical explanation. The last member of the group was Sophia, a petite girl with long red hair, always wearing bright scarves. Her creative spirit and intuition helped her find the most unusual angles for filming, and her ability to sense a place's energy had saved the team from trouble more than once, though Jake just chuckled at her premonitions. They drove along a narrow dirt road, surrounded by withered grass and sparse trees, whose bare branches reached for the gray sky, as if trying to grasp the last rays of the setting sun. Their destination was the abandoned farm of Joseph Crow, which Emily had learned about from an old forum for urban legend enthusiasts. A place left vacant for 3 decades after the mysterious disappearance of its owner, about whom locals spoke only in whispers, calling the farm cursed. When the pickup finally stopped at a sagging fence, the friends were met with a grim sight. An old wooden house with peeling paint, once white but now gray from time and dampness, stood amid a plot surrounded by an overgrown cornfield where dry, brittle stalks jutted from the ground like skeletons of a long-forgotten harvest. The house's roof sagged, one window was shattered, and glass shards glittered in the grass, reflecting the faint light. Rusty farming tool sickles, shovels, and rakes lay scattered near the shed, streaked with rust stains, as if the earth's blood had seeped through the metal. The air was heavy with the smell of rotting wood and moisture, and the silence, broken only by the occasional creak of old boards in the wind, created a sense that the farm was holding its breath, watching the uninvited guests. Ethan was the first to leap from the truck, slamming the door, and rubbed his hands with enthusiasm, eager for some great content, while Sophia, frowning, scanned the field, feeling an inexplicable chill run down her spine. While Ethan and Emily were setting up the filming spot near the house, Jake and Sophia, driven by curiosity, headed toward the sagging shed, its rotting boards creaking under gusts of cold wind as if lamenting years of neglect. Inside, a dim half-light reigned, pierced only by thin rays of sunset that slipped through the wall cracks, illuminating dusty beams and cobweb-covered corners. The air was heavy, saturated with the smell of mold and something sharper, almost metallic, which made Sophia wince, though she couldn't pinpoint what troubled her. Jake, skeptically snorting, examined the old tools scattered across the floor, until his gaze landed on a worn leather journal lying on a tilted wooden table, cluttered with rusty nails and rope scraps. Sophia, sensing a strange pull, carefully opened the journal, her fingers trembling slightly as she turned the yellowed pages filled with Joseph Crow's uneven handwriting. The entries spoke of bloody rituals the farmer had performed on his crops. He described mixing animal blood with the soil, carving ancient symbols into the corn stalks to awaken the land's spirit and protect it from outsiders. And in the final lines, he mentioned a harvest heart, meant to be his greatest creation. As Sophia read, she paled, her intuition screaming danger. But Jake just shrugged, muttering that it was likely the ramblings of a mad old man, though his voice wavered when he noticed the same symbols carved into the table as those in the journal. Meanwhile, Ethan and Emily, standing at the edge of the cornfield, tried to record an intro for the video, but their attention kept drifting to the oddities they couldn't ignore. The corn, dry and brittle, looked as if it had grown there for decades without Korean impossibility, Emily realized, furrowing her brow as her analytical mind sought an explanation that eluded her. Her thoughts were interrupted by a faint rustle from deep within the field, as if someone or something moved cautiously among the stalks, snapping them with a barely audible crack. Ethan, always eager for action, stepped closer to the field, squinting to spot the source of the sound, but saw nothing except endless rows of withered plants swaying in the wind. Yet the rustling persisted, growing louder and more rhythmic, as if numerous light, swift feet were approaching, hidden behind the dense wall of corn. Emily's heart raced as she grabbed Ethan's sleeve, her emotions spilling out as she whispered that they needed to leave. But her voice was drowned by a new sound, a low, almost animalistic hiss, now coming from all directions. At that moment, shadows long and jagged began flickering among the stalks, appearing and vanishing as if toying with their fear. And Ethan, for the first time that evening, felt a chill run down his spine, while Emily, clutching his hand, realized they were facing something beyond explanation. The sky above the farm turned a blood-red sunset as the cornfield, until then a mere dead maze of dry stalks, suddenly came alive with an ominous rustling that froze Ethan and Emily's blood in their veins. From the depths of the field, pushing aside brittle stalks with a crunch like breaking bones, creatures began to crawl outside so horrific the mind refused to believe them. These beings seemed born of nightmare. Their bodies, pieced together from rotting plants, reeked of damp earth and decay, leaves coated in black mold hanging like shredded flesh, while their hands were long, curved claws formed from hardened corn kernels, sharp as blades. Their heads, if they could be called, that were tangled masses of roots, studded with teeth made from aged yellowed cobs, still capable of tearing flesh. The creature's eyes glowed with a faint greenish light, like swamp fires, and their movements, jerky yet terrifyingly swift, betrayed an unnatural hunger aimed at the unwelcome intruders. Emily, her feet rooted to the ground in terror, was the first to notice the largest of the creatures, its mouth a cob, emit a low, gurgling sound, which the others picked up, creating a chilling chorus that made hairs stand on end. Without wasting a moment, Ethan grabbed Emily's hand, and they stumbled over clumps and rusty tools, racing toward the house, shouting for Jake and Sophia to follow. Reaching the porch, they burst inside, slamming the door with such force that the old hinges groaned in protest, threatening to give way. Jake and Sophia, rushing out of the shed with the journal in hand, made it in just behind them, and the four, panting heavily, pressed against the wall, listening as the thudding and rustling outside grew louder, as if the creatures were encircling the house, tightening their ring. But their hope of refuge proved an illusion. The house, steeped in years of abandonment, suddenly stirred like a predator sensing prey. From beneath the floor, through cracks in the walls, and even from the ceiling, thick black roots began to emerge, their damp surfaces glistening with drops of a viscous, tar-like liquid. These roots, writhing like snakes, lunged toward the doors and windows, weaving a dense net that creaked as it tightened, cutting off all escape routes. The window panes rattled, then began to crack under the pressure from outside, and Emily, Her nerves stretched to the breaking point, screamed as one root brushed her leg, leaving a sticky mark that burned her skin. At that moment, the friend's attention was drawn to a faint light emanating from an old cracked mirror hanging on the kitchen wall, its paint peeling away. In its murky surface, as if rising from the depths, a figure began to take shape, semi-transparent, yet horrifyingly real. It was the ghost of Joseph Crow, clad in a tattered, dirt-stained overall, his empty eye sockets glowing with two tiny embers like dying coals. His skin, if it could be called that, was gray and cracked like parched earth, while tendrils resembling roots dangled from beneath his hat, wriggling as if alive. Slowly, he raised a hand pointing at the friends, and his voice, deep and sepulchral, echoed through the house, bouncing off the walls like a cave's reverberation. He declared that they had defiled his land, disturbing the harvest peace, and now their blood would serve as new fertilizer to feed his creation. The mirror trembled, and Joseph's reflection distorted, his mouth stretching into an unnatural grin, revealing teeth like rotten kernels, while the roots around the house tightened further, underscoring the inevitability of his threat. Inside the house, now a trap, the air grew thick with fear, and the damp smell mingling with the acrid stench of rotting plants seeping from outside. Ethan, whose determination had always been his greatest weapon, couldn't accept being cornered, and clenching his fists, he frantically searched for an escape despite the roots that, like living things, continued to entwine the house, tightening their grip. He rushed to the living room window where the root net was slightly thinner, and grabbing a rusty sickle from the corner, began hacking at them with a fury that reddened his face and swelled the veins in his neck. The roots yielded with difficulty, oozing black sludge that hissed as it hit the floor, but Ethan persisted until he carved a small opening through which the moonlit field was visible. Yet his triumph was short-lived. From the field's darkness, creatures emerged with unnatural speed, their decaying plant bodies moving swiftly, their corn kernel claws glinting like blades. One, with a cob for a mouth studded with sharp teeth, leapt toward the window, its long, writhing roots coiling around Ethan's legs and yanking him outward. He managed only a hoarse cry, clutching the windowsill, but the creatures surrounding him dragged him into the field, his silhouette dissolving among the cornstalks, leaving behind only the echo of a desperate scream that faded into the night. Emily, her eyes welling with tears and hands trembling with terror, dropped to her knees beside Joseph's journal, which Sophia had flung to the floor in panic. Her analytical mind, despite the chaos, forced her to focus, and wiping tears with her sleeve, she began flipping through the farmer's mad scribblings. The uneven handwriting detailed the harvest heart, a massive cob hidden in the house's basement, the source of the curse binding Joseph's spirit to the animated crops. Scanning the final notes, Emily realized the only way to stop the nightmare was to burn this heart, severing the link between Joseph and his monstrosities. Her gaze fell on a dark opening in the kitchen corner leading to the basement, from which wafted the damp smell of earth and a faint whisper, as if the house itself tried to deter her. But there was no time to hesitate. The creatures were already battering the house, their claws gouging deep scratches in the walls, their low growls growing louder. Jake and Sophia, understanding Emily needed time, rushed to the old pantry on the kitchen floor, where shelves held dusty jars of preserved vegetables coated in grime. Jake, gritting his teeth, grabbed a few jars and, taking aim, hurled them at the window where one creature had thrust its mold-covered head. The jar shattered against its face, and the beast, emitting a gurgling shriek, recoiled as the thick brine from the pickles began eating away at its plant flesh, making it writhe. Inspired, Sophia snatched other jars, throwing them one after another, her red hair disheveled and her face dotted with sweat, but she pressed on until the creatures retreated from the window, distracted by the unexpected assault. This gave Emily her chance. Clutching the journal in one hand and Jake's lighter, which he'd slipped her before filming began, in the other, she dashed toward the basement. The descent was narrow, the steps creaking under her weight, the mold-covered walls seeming alive, pulsing with her racing heartbeat. Reaching the bottom, she found herself in a damp chamber where, at the center of the earthen floor, towered a giant cob surrounded by slowly wriggling roots, guarding it, while black ooze seeped from its core, exuding a stench that made Emily's head spin. As Emily descended into the basement, she felt dampness and cold envelop her like invisible hands trying to hold her in place, while the smell of earth mixed with something rotting became almost unbearable, forcing her to breathe through her sleeve. At the center of the room, on the earthen floor, loomed the harvest heart, a giant cob the size of a person, its surface covered in dark, nearly black husks from which oozed a viscous, tar-like liquid, each drop hissing as it hit the ground, leaving small smoking pits. Thick, writhing roots, like snakes, encircled the cob, slowly moving as if guarding it, emitting a faint greenish, sickly glow that bathed the basement in ghostly light. Emily, clutching the lighter in her trembling hand, stepped closer, but her movement was halted by a sudden rush of icy air that swept through the basement, making her hair stand on end. From the shadow behind the cob, a figure slowly emerged. It was Joseph Crow, no longer a ghost but in physical form, eerily tangible. His body, cracked like parched earth, was studded with roots growing from his skin, and his face, twisted with madness, featured empty eye sockets oozing the same black liquid as the cob, staring directly at Emily. His dirt-caked overalls hung in rags, and his hands, ending in corn kernel claws, rose slowly as if to seize her. Despite the fear paralyzing her body, Emily forced herself to act. She flicked the lighter, and a tiny stubborn flame flared in her hand. Joseph let out a low, guttural growl, stepping toward her, and the roots around the cob began reaching for her, wriggling like tentacles. But Emily, gathering all her strength, lunged forward and brought the flame to the cob. The fire at first hesitantly licked the husk, but then, as if sensing weakness, blazed up with ferocious speed, engulfing the cob in greedy tongues of flame. Joseph unleashed an inhuman scream, his body cracking like dry clay, black smoke bursting from the fissures, as the roots around the cob ignited, writhing in agony. Upstairs in the house, the creatures still clawing at the walls froze, their decaying plant bodies crumbling to ash, as if an invisible bond holding them together had been severed. Joseph, now blazing like a torch, took a final step toward Emily, but his body shattered into pieces, collapsing into a heap of smoldering embers that fell to the floor, leaving only the acrid smell of smoke and the crackling of fire breaking the silence. The house, as if sensing its master's demise, began to collapse. The basement ceiling beams groaned, showering Emily with dust and splinters, while the walls trembled like in an earthquake. Coughing from the smoke, Emily rushed to the stairs, her feet slipping on the earthen floor. But she managed to climb out where Jake and Sophia, covered in dust and grime, were already running for the exit. The roots sealing the doors and windows were now burning, clearing a path, and the three friends, stumbling and supporting each other, burst outside, collapsing onto the grass a few meters from the house. Panting heavily, they turned to see the old building, engulfed in flames, folding in on itself like a house of cards, its roof crashing down with a deafening roar as the walls crumbled into a pile of burning debris. Emily, still clutching the journal, gazed at the field, hoping to spot Ethan, but among the now still, lifeless corn stalks, there was no movement. Jake, wiping sweat from his brow, hugged Sophia, whose eyes brimmed with tears, and the three, staggering, headed toward the truck, realizing Ethan was gone for good and the nightmare they'd endured would haunt them forever. Emily, Jake, and Sophia, still trembling from the terror they'd endured, slowly trudged toward their pickup truck parked by the sagging fence, which now seemed the sole witness to their nightmare, untouched by fire and ruin. Their clothes were caked with dirt and ash, their pale, exhausted faces reflecting a mix of fear and disbelief that they had survived. Sophia clutched a damaged camera Jake had grabbed as they fled the collapsing houses, casing cracked, lens shattered, and screen flickering with fragmented footage. Yet those clips captured their entire ordeal. Fleeting shadows of the creatures, burning roots, and Joseph's distorted face dissolving into smoke. Jake, his hands still shaking, opened the car door, and the three climbed inside in silence, unable to speak, as if afraid their voices might awaken something left behind. Emily, seated in the front, pressed Joseph's journal to her chest, the only thing to survive the fire in. Her fingers nervously fidgeted with its charred edges, as if still seeking answers within. When the engine roared to life with a hoarse rumble, the pickup slowly pulled away, leaving a cloud of dust that rose into the air, blending with the smoke from the smoldering house ruins, and the three friends drove off without looking back, shaken but alive, though Ethan's shadow, lost in this nightmare, would forever linger in their memories. Meanwhile, the field surrounding the farm's ruins sank into an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of embers still glowing among the charred remains. The moon, pale and cold, hung over the horizon, casting a silvery light on the dead cornstalks now lying on the ground, blackened and lifeless after the harvest heart was destroyed. But in this stillness, at the field's center where the earth was strewn with ash and tiny fragments of burned roots, something began to stir. From beneath the soil, slowly and insistently, a new stalk emerged, thin and pale, with a faint greenish hue that seemed unnatural in this dead place. Its growth was nearly imperceptible, but with each second it rose higher, its leaves unfurling with a faint rustle, and at its tip, a small cob began to form, from which a tiny drop of black ooze seeped, like a tear poised to fall to the ground. At that moment, the air above the field thickened, and from nowhere, as if an echo from another realm, Joseph's voice resounded deep and sepulchral, laced with malice and a promise of eternal return. The harvest always comes back. The voice seemed to rise from the earth itself, rolling across the field like a wind, then fading into the night, leaving behind only a sense of inevitable threat that might never fully vanish. After the events at the abandoned farm, Emily, Jake, and Sophia returned to their homes, but the normal life they longed for remained out of reach, as if a thin veil of nightmare had forever separated them from their old world. Emily, settled in her small apartment on the city's outskirts, tried to occupy herself with work, but her once sharp analytical mind was now clouded by a persistent unease she couldn't shake. Every night, nightmares plagued her. Ethan, with empty eyes and a body covered in roots, reached for her from the cornfield, whispering her name in Joseph's voice, while Joseph himself, with his gray, cracked face, stood behind, smirking, his corn kernel claws scraping the ground, leaving bloody trails. She'd wake in a cold sweat, her heart pounding, hands clutching the blanket as if warding off an unseen threat. Jake, living in a nearby district, also found no peace. His skepticism, once a shield against fear, now crumbled as he dreamed of harvest creatures surrounding him, and Ethan, transformed into a plant monster, pointing accusingly, blaming them for failing to save him. Sophia, the most sensitive of the trio, locked herself in her room, refusing to leave, her once vibrant creativity fading under the weight of visions where Joseph, with hollow eye sockets, whispered she was next, and her beloved colorful scarves turned into choking roots in those dreams. Desperate to cope with her anxiety, Emily once descended to her apartment's basement to sort through boxes of items she'd brought from the farm, hoping routine would distract her from dark thoughts. But while rummaging through old bags, she stumbled upon a small cob that had survived the ashes after she burned her backpack she'd thought it incinerated with the rest. Yet somehow it endured, small, black, with faint cracks on its surface. Now it lay on the basement's concrete floor, and to her horror, Emily noticed it was growing. Thin roots, like spider legs, extended from its base, burrowing into the floor, while the cob itself seemed to pulse like a living heart, feeding on the fears she unwittingly brought with her each time she descended. The air in the basement grew heavy, thick with the familiar stench of rotting earth, and Emily, frozen, felt her own fear, like an invisible thread, binding her to the cob, accelerating its growth as its roots began slowly creeping toward her feet, sensing her panic. Meanwhile, Jake, trying to distract himself by repairing equipment in his workshop, noticed something odd that made him drop his screwdriver from trembling hands. On his forearm, where his skin had been cleared that morning, plant-like patterns emerged, thin greenish lines resembling stalks, wriggling like a living tattoo across his body. He realized the patterns grew brighter and larger when he was nervous. Recalling the farm or hearing a rustle outside made the lines pulse, the skin around them burning like a rash. In a panic, Jake tried washing them off in the bathroom, but water only intensified the sting, and the pattern seemed to deepen, like roots sprouting beneath his skin. In the mirror, he glimpsed his reflection distort for a moment, Ethan's plant-covered face flashing in his eyes with silent reproach. The trio, crushed by fear and guilt, had no idea that the nightmare they'd survived was only the beginning, and Joseph Crow's farm curse had taken root deeper than they could imagine. Sophia, locked in her room where the walls were adorned with her old sketches and photos, finally decided to tackle the damaged camera that miraculously preserved footage from the farm, hoping to find something that might explain their nightmares or restore their peace. Her red hair was tied in a messy bun, and her eyes, red from sleepless nights, intently studied the grainy frames she'd managed to recover by connecting the camera to her old laptop. The screen flickered, displaying fragments of video, fleeting shadows of creatures, burning roots, her friends' screams, but guided by her intuition, Sophia kept scrolling until she stumbled upon a strange clip recorded after their escape from the house. In the dim light of the field stood Ethan, his body covered in roots, his skin taking on an earthy hue, yet his eyes, though empty, still held a spark of humanity. Slowly, he raised a hand, pointing somewhere, his lips moving with an encoded message Sophia deciphered by slowing the frames. He said he'd become part of the harvest, consumed by Joseph's curse, but he could still be saved if they found the source of power fueling this evil. His voice, distorted and raspy, echoed like a cry from the grave, yet carried a plea, and Sophia, frozen before the screen, felt tears sting her cheeks as her heart tightened with both hope and terror. Meanwhile, Emily, whose analytical mind wouldn't let her rest, decided to return to the gas station where they'd stopped after fleeing the farm, hoping to learn more from the elderly clerk whose words about the curse had seemed too ominous to be mere coincidence. She parked near a small shop surrounded by weathered billboards and rusty barrels, stepping inside where the smell of old coffee and dampness greeted her like an old acquaintance. The clerk, a gaunt old man with a wrinkled face and faded eyes, stood behind the counter, flipping through yellowed newspapers, and spotting Emily, instantly understood her purpose. His gaze darkening as his hands stilled, he began recounting an ancient cult to which Joseph Crow belonged, people who worshiped the earth as a living deity, offering blood sacrifices for power, and about the seed of fear Joseph had planted on his farm, nourished by human emotions, especially fear, making the curse nearly immortal. His voice, hoarse with age, spoke softly, yet each word landed like a stone, and Emily, listening, felt goosebumps rise on her skin, especially when he mentioned the curse could be undone only by finding its source in the ancient tree in the forest where Joseph drew his power, feeding it with the blood and fear of his victims. Returning home, Emily gathered Jake and Sophia, and the three sat around the table in her cramped kitchen, surrounded by empty coffee mugs and old maps, studying the area around the farm to pinpoint the tree's location. Sophia showed them the footage of Ethan, her intuition suggesting the direction he pointed led to a forest north of the farm, where old maps marked a spot labeled Black Oak. Emily, flipping through the clerk's notes he'd given her before she left, found mention of an ancient tree known locally as the Root of Evil, a massive black oak whose roots, by legend, plunged so deep into the earth they reached hell itself. Despite the fear still gripping their hearts, the trio realized this was their only chance to break the curse, save Ethan, and perhaps themselves, and they began preparing for a journey into the forest, where a new battle with the darkness Joseph left behind awaited them. Emily's home, once a safe haven, began transforming into the stage for a new nightmare, as if Joseph Crow's farm curse had followed her, taking root in her life. It started with faint cracks in the walls of her small apartment, appearing overnight while she slept, but by morning, those cracks had widened, and from them sprouted roots thin as spider threads at first, but growing thicker and blacker with each hour, their surfaces glistening with moisture as if alive, exuding the stench of dampness and rotting earth. These roots, wriggling like snakes, slowly crept across the walls, entwining furniture, wrapping around chair legs and picture frames, and in some spots, they pierced the wallpaper, leaving sticky trails of black ooze that dripped to the floor, hissing like acid. Waking to a strange rustling, like a whisper of leaves, Emily froze in her bed as she watched her bedroom turn into a jungle-like scene, and in the corner by the window, Ethan's shadow emerged, now fully transformed into a plant creature, his body covered in writhing roots like tentacles, his face devoid of human features, woven from tangled stalks with two greenish glows for eyes. He stood motionless, but his shadow, cast by the moonlight, seemed alive, tracking her every move, and her heart clenched with horror as she realized he wasn't just a ghost of her past, but part of the curse they'd failed to destroy. At the same time, Jake, at his own home, struggled with the plant patterns increasingly appearing on his skin, especially when he grew anxious or thought of the farm. Standing before the bathroom mirror under a dim bulb, he desperately scrubbed his forearm with a rough sponge, hoping to erase the greenish lines now resembling stalks with tiny leaves. But the harder he rubbed, the brighter the patterns glowed, and the skin around them burned like a rash. In a panic, he grabbed scissors to scrape off the top layer of skin, but when the blade touched the pattern, a thin stream of black ooze burst forth, and the designs, as if alive, began spreading with terrifying speed across his arm and then his chest. At that moment, the ground beneath his house trembled, and from cracks in the backyard, new corn stalks began sprouting, rising swiftly, and from them, like from cocoons, emerged creatures akin to those they'd encountered on the farm, rotting plants with grain claws and cob teeth, their movements jerky yet filled with sinister intent. Drawn by Jake's fear, these beings spread through the city, slithering through alleys, rooting into fences and house walls, their low, gurgling growls echoing down the streets, sowing panic among residents who didn't yet grasp what they faced. Sophia, seated in her room surrounded by old sketches, suddenly felt the air grow heavy, and the lamplight began flickering, casting ominous shadows on the walls. Her keen intuition screamed danger, and at that moment from the shadows, Joseph Crow's figure began to form. His ghost, with its gray, cracked face and hollow eye sockets oozing black liquid, looked even more menacing than on the farm. Roots protruding from his body writhed like living things, and his dirt-caked overalls seemed fused to his flesh. Slowly, he raised a hand, pointing at Sophia, and his voice, sepulchral and raspy, filled the room, declaring that they had become part of the ritual by carrying the seed from the farm, and now the curse lived within them, feeding on their fear and spreading it like a plague. His figure began to dissolve, but before vanishing, he left behind a small cob that thudded to the floor, and Sophia, frozen, watched as thin roots sprouted from it, slowly creeping toward her feet, as if confirming Joseph's words that they could never escape his harvest. Emily, Jake, and Sophia, gathering the last of their courage, set out for the forest north of the farm, where, according to the clerk, the source of the Cursian ancient tree fueling Joseph Crow's power lay hidden. They drove in the old pickup, its trunk packed with gasoline canisters, bags of salt, and old flashlights Jake had retrieved from his workshop, hoping the light would guide them through the dark woods. The forest welcomed them with an ominous silence, broken only by the crunch of branches under the tires and the occasional cries of nightbirds, sounding like warnings. Leaving the truck at the edge, they proceeded on foot, pushing through dense undergrowth where moss-covered trees loomed like ancient sentinels, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky, obscuring the stars. Emily, clutching the map, led the group, her face tense yet resolute, while Jake carried a gasoline canister, and Sophia, with a bag of salt over her shoulder, kept glancing back, her intuition whispering that the forest was watching them. The air was thick with the scent of dampness and something decaying, and the ground beneath their feet grew increasingly soggy, as if soaked not with water, but something far more sinister. Their journey soon halted as animated plants burst from the earth, tearing through the soil with a crack stalks coated in black mold, bristling with needle-sharp thorns, and roots wriggling like tentacles, lunging for their legs. These plants, seemingly spawned by the curse itself, moved with unnatural speed, their leaves rustling with a sound like whispers, and within that rustle, Joseph's voice could be heard, luring them deeper into the forest. Suddenly, from the shadows of the trees, Ethan's figure emerged, but he was now fully consumed by the harvest. His body was a tangle of interwoven roots and stalks, his face hidden beneath a layer of rotting leaves, and when he opened his mouth, Joseph's deep, sepulchral voice poured out, promising salvation if they followed him. Ethan pointed in a direction opposite their path, his movements slow yet hypnotic, and Emily, momentarily swayed by his call, stepped forward. But Sophia, sensing a trap, grabbed her hand, snapping her out of the trance. Jake, dropping the canister, swung the flashlight to fend off the encroaching plants, but one, with a thorn as long as a dagger, suddenly pierced Sophia's leg, and she cried out in pain, collapsing to her knees, her blood mixing with the soil as the plants, sensing her weakness, closed in, their roots stretching toward her wound like hungry worms. Despite her injury, Sophia, gritting her teeth, tossed a handful of salt at the nearest plant, which hissed and began to dissolve, giving them a chance to press on. Emily and Jake, supporting Sophia, continued until they reached a clearing where an ancient tree stood, a massive black oak, its trunk cracked like aged skin, its bare, twisted branches reaching skyward like claws. Its roots, thick and black, plunged deep into the earth, oozing a glossy, black liquid that dripped onto the ground, forming pools emitting acrid steam. The tree radiated a sinister energy, the air around it heavy with the stench of decay and fear, and carved into its bark, as if by an inhuman hand, were the same symbols from Joseph's journal. Emily, gazing at the tree, realized they'd found the curse's source, but Ethan's shadow, still trailing them, drew closer, his steps accompanied by the rustle of leaves, and Joseph's voice grew louder, promising eternal oblivion if they didn't retreat. The clearing where the black oak towered felt like the heart of the sinister forest, and the air around it was so heavy that every breath came with effort for Emily, Jake, and Sophia, as if the tree itself drained their life. Emily, gritting her teeth, stepped forward, clutching a gasoline canister, her hands trembling but her eyes burning with resolve stronger than fear, while Jake, beside her, unscrewed his canister's cap, and together they began dousing the tree. Its cracked trunk seemed to absorb the liquid without resistance, the gasoline streaming down the bark in glistening trails, mixing with the acrid scent of the black ooze seeping from its roots, forming pools that reflected the stars in a warped, mirror-like distortion. The tree's thick, writhing roots began to stir, as if sensing a threat, but Emily and Jake pressed on, circling the oak until its base glistened with fuel, and the ground around it reeked of fumes. At that moment, Ethan emerged from the tree's shadows, now fully under Joseph's control. His body, woven from roots and stalks, moved with unnatural grace, his eyes glowing with a greenish light, empty yet brimming with malice. He raised his hands, and roots long and black burst from the earth around him, lashing toward Emily and Jake, coiling around their legs like tentacles and squeezing with such force that Emily nearly dropped her lighter, while Jake, struggling to break free, felt his skin burn from the sticky ooze seeping from the roots. Despite the throbbing pain in her leg, Sophia forced herself to stand, leaning against a nearby tree, her face pale and her red hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. But her intuition urged her to act. She grabbed the salt bag still slung over her shoulder and, overcoming the pain, rushed toward Ethan, scattering salt around him in a protective circle. The white crystals hissed like acid upon contact with the roots, and Ethan, emitting a low growl in Joseph's voice, froze, his movements slowing as the roots ensnaring Emily and Jake weakened, dissolving into the air like smoke. In that moment, something shifted in Ethan. His eyes, for an instant, turned human, the green light fading, revealing pain and a plea, and his voice, weak and raspy yet no longer Joseph's, begged them to end it before the curse consumed them all. Emily, feeling tears sting her cheeks, nodded, and breaking free from the roots, flicked her lighter and tossed it toward the tree's base where the gasoline awaited a spark. Flames erupted with a deafening roar, engulfing the black oak in an otherworldly fire that burned with unnatural brightness, its tongues green and black like the curse itself, casting a sinister glow that made the tree's shadows quiver as if alive. Joseph, whose essence was bound to the tree, manifested within the flames, his figure woven from smoke and roots screaming and writhing in agony, his empty eye sockets blazing, his voice full of rage echoing through the forest, yet growing fainter with each moment until it dissolved into the crackling of the burning tree. Ethan, standing nearby, began to disintegrate, his plant body turning to ash. But before vanishing, he turned to his friends, his lips now almost human, whispering, "Thank you," before he fully dissolved into the air, leaving only a handful of ash carried off by the wind. The tree, consumed by flames, began to collapse, its roots oozing black ooze burning with a hiss, while the forest around it, as if purging itself, filled with the scent of burning wood. The supernatural fire, having done its work, began to fade, leaving behind only smoke and silence, broken by the distant hoot of an owl. Emily, Jake, and Sophia, supporting each other, gazed at the tree's ruins, feeling the weight of the curse finally lift from their hearts. Emily, Jake, and Sophia, exhausted after their battle with the black oak, trudged back through the forest, which now seemed less menacing, though the tree's shadows still cast long, jagged silhouettes on the ground, illuminated by the pale moonlight. Their clothes were coated in ash and dirt, their faces gaunt with fatigue, their steps heavy as if each carried the weight of the nightmare they'd endured. Sophia, limping from the wound in her leg, leaned on Emily, whose hands still trembled from the strain, but her eyes shone with firm conviction that Joseph Crow's curse was finally destroyed. Jake, walking slightly ahead, carried the empty gasoline canister, his gaze occasionally dropping to his forearm, where the plant patterns that had tormented him for days were fading. The greenish lines resembling stalks paled before his eyes, dissolving like ink in water, leaving only a faint redness on his skin as a reminder of its reality. They reached the pickup parked at the forest's edge, climbed inside, and drove home in silence, feeling with each mile away from the woods the burden on their hearts lighten, the nightmares that had haunted them receding like shadows before dawn. When they finally parted to their homes, each collapsed into bed, sinking into a deep, peaceful sleep for the first time in days, certain the curse was lifted and Ethan, their lost friend, had found peace. Yet the forest, where supernatural flames had recently blazed, was not as calm as it seemed. The ash-covered remains where the black oak had stood appeared dead, but in this silence, broken only by the rustle of wind, something began to stir. From beneath the ground, at the clearing's center, where the oak's roots had burned to ash, a new shoot slowly emerged, thin and pale, with a faint greenish hue unnatural against the charred soil. Its tiny, fragile leaves unfurled with a barely audible rustle, and at its tip, a small cob began to form, from which a drop of black ooze seeped, the same that had fueled Joseph's curse. The shoot, as if alive, reached for the moonlight, its movement slow yet brimming with sinister determination, as if the evil rooted in this place refused to die. At that moment, from somewhere distant among the trees, a child's laughter rang out pure and clear, yet tinged with something inhuman that would freeze any heart. The laughter echoed through the forest, rising and falling, blending innocence with an eerie menace, hinting at a new bearer of the curse, perhaps already chosen to continue Joseph's work. The camera slowly pulled back, revealing the ash heap, the chute, and the dark forest swallowed by night, the laughter fading to leave a lingering sense that this story was far from over, and the darkness the friends had tried to destroy was merely biding its time to return.